So welcome everyone to All That Wine with Susannah Gold, me, Katarina, and our guest Mike Madaio, who is writing about, who has just written a book about a grape that we will let him present better himself. And it's also being translated by a friend of mine, which I think will probably be out later on. So welcome again. Let's Mike present himself. And for anyone who has any questions, just write them in the chat wherever you're watching.
This is Mike's second book, or is it your third?
So I've published. So I've been writing about food and wine. Just to go back a little bit, I've been writing about food and wine for 20 years, and started out as a blogger, did some magazine work, and more recently have been doing more in the book space. And so I've written 2 full-length books, and then I've written a number of shorter books, of which this is one. And as Katarina and I were talking a minute ago off stage about how this is really the first chapter of a potentially longer book that I decided to publish as I write, because it is very hard to write a long book and takes a lot of time. What else do you guys want me to?
I would love to know how you chose this topic, and what is the topic?
Yes, well, I guess we should say the topic we have next.
We should. I think we should say the title.
So this particular thing is about Pecorino, the Pecorino grape.
Mm-hmm.
And as I said, the idea is to be part of a larger series, which I call Almost Lost Italian Grapes. So the idea that there are a lot of Italian grapes that had kind of fallen out of style, been mostly forgotten, were only grown in a very small amount of places, and the story typically, as it goes, was that it found a champion, either one person or a small group of people who sort of said, this grape could really be something special. And these people worked to sort of bring back, if you would, the grape into the more mainstream. And I found it just fascinating how somebody could sort of go through that, and some of the trials and tribulations that they faced as they went through that. And Pecorino is a great example where and we can get into the whole Abruzzo Marche thing as well. But essentially, if we look at Marche first, there was a guy who sort of went to Italy and said, our white wines here in my area of Marche are not particularly good, and so we need to come up with something else. And kind of did a bunch of research and went around and eventually found Pecorino and did some experimentation with it, and it obviously became a big hit in Italy.
And what year was that? What are we talking about? And who are we talking about? Are we allowed
to? So I'm talking about Guido Cocci-Grifoni of the Cocci-Grifoni winery. He's passed away, but his family still runs the winery. So this was in the 1980s that he started to experiment with Pecorino. So maybe 70s where he started to realize that the other whites, mostly Trebbiano Toscano, which were grown in Ascoli Piceno, which is the southernmost region in Marche, were not really to the quality that they needed to be to, attract customers outside of the small region. And so in the 80s, really, in the 1980s, that he started to experiment with it more.
And when did it become really much more popular? Because it's such a popular grape, Pecorino, both in Le Marche and in Abruzzo.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't really until the 2000s. There's a stat in the book, and I don't have it right in front of me, but I think it was like in 2000, this is VCR data that said like 87 hectares were planted.
Wow.
And then by 2010, it was 1,500.
Wow.
And then it's probably still even more now. I haven't seen a more recent number, but I would imagine it's even higher than that.
In Le Marche, or in both Le Marche
in both, yeah.
Yeah. And in your book,
it's more popular in Abruzzo because it's really only grown in Ascoli Piceno in Marche, which is, you know, a much smaller region than obviously all of Abruzzo.
Well, it's funny because I mean, the FIDA is the DOCG, but their consortium is not very active. I think you hear much more about the Pecorino from Abruzzo, actually.
For sure.
Yeah, we see more Pecorino from Abruzzo here in the States as well. But I initially learned about Pecorino from Angela Vellinosi, who's in Ascoli Piceno.
Right.
Who was the president of the OFIDA DOCG. And, you know, they were very strong about Pecorino, but I haven't, other than Angela, it wasn't as kind of popular here from the map.
Yeah, it's definitely not something you come across as much. I first came across it from this guy, Jack Polidori, who became a friend of mine. He's a very small importer, but he sells his wine in Pennsylvania, where I live, which is a state-controlled,
right?
Very strange.
Yep.
The way they sell wine. So his wines were being funneled into the state at a point, and that's how. And they were from Marche as well. But one of the interesting things about the story is that when Guido Cocci-Grifoni started to push for this grape, a lot of people in Marche were not interested in what he was telling them. And eventually a guy over in Abruzzo, and I mean, we talk about them like they're totally separate regions, but like, you know, obviously,
there's only like less than half an hour.
Right.
And also their families are completely intermingled. In fact, speaking of Angela, I'd always thought Angela was born in Le Marche, but she was born in Abruzzo and now has a winery in Abruzzo also. So they're very intertwined as regions.
And you could probably argue that, you know, Ascoli Piceno has more in common with Northern Abruzzo than it does with, you know, Jesi and Metallica and the sort of Verdicchio hubs.
Right.
At least, you know, terrain wise and so forth. So, but anyway, yeah. So Cocci-Grifoni was trying to get other people to realize the value of this grape. And there was a guy over in Abruzzo who was actually working for VCR, the nursery, who started to, you know, believe in it as well. And so there was really this sort of parallel evolution happening, and it obviously became more popular. But it was interesting when I've been to the OFIDA region and talking to winemakers there, they're sort of very upset about the fact that it's more known for Abruzzo, because they feel, you know, it kind of should belong to them, and they have the only DOCG and so forth. So,
well, there's a lot of Campanilismo still everywhere, right?
Yeah.
What drew you to Pecorino? Like, what was it that made you think? Was it when you tasted it where you're like, oh my God, this is a white wine that's unlike anything I've ever had. This is exciting. Like, what was the quality of Pecorino that really drove you to study and delve deep into its past and future?
Yeah. So, I mean, unlike any I've ever had, is probably a little strong, but I think it's what I find interesting about it is it develops really rich fruit flavors, like borderline even tropical, but yet like still retains acidity. And so it's just a really serious, bold wine. I mean, I love like bold white wines that remain, you know, highly acidic, and this is definitely one of them, and one of the first ones that I tried with those kinds of qualities. And so I think that was really interesting. And then too, I think was the story, you know. I mean, I sort of joke about it in the book, but like when I first heard the story, how it was like rediscovered, I had all these romantic ideas in my head of like someone just stumbling across it accidentally and discovering it somehow, which isn't really what happened. But those types of stories fascinate me, because this idea that this wine could have, or this grape could have just gone away if it
Right.
wasn't for, a few folks hanging on to it.
It's such an Italian story. And I mean, I'm sure the same stories are told in other parts of the world. I'm just more familiar with this particular story in this particular country, but it's so true. Without a champion, a grapevine really does not have the same future direction. They really need a champion within Italy, and then they need a whole bunch of champions outside of Italy to make it a really well-known grape. Do you associate Pecorino, like if you were going to introduce a newcomer who didn't know Pecorino to Pecorino, what other grape variety would it remind you of? Like, I think of Pecorino sometimes, not exactly similar, but it reminds me, certain qualities of Pecorino remind me of Chenin Blanc, like the kind of waxy nature of it. What do you guys think? Is there like a grapevine, like if you're a Chardonnay drinker, you only drink some other grape variety, like what grape was like a gateway grape to make them understand Pecorino, if you think one is needed?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tricky because there's so many things. And you brought up Chardonnay. I mean, certainly Chardonnay can also trend towards more tropical notes.
It can.
When it's richer. I think it doesn't, in those cases, it doesn't tend to have as much acidity as Pecorino hangs on to. I mean, another one I thought of is not exactly going to be that helpful, maybe for Americans at least, but I mean, maybe Greco, because that's another one that can develop really bold fruit notes, but still remain.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, the acidity and minerality is similar with the Greco, no?
Yep.
Yeah, minerality is another thing that they talk about quite a bit with Pecorino, and I think, I mean, another interesting thing about that, what brought me to it, and I mean, I always want to be careful about this, because when you start talking about the location, you don't want to imply that what exactly that the minerals are coming from the dirt or whatever. But I got to visit Ascoli Piceno and really the Affida area and Ripatransone and in the Ascoli Piceno region, and that region is just so incredibly beautiful. Like,
it is,
because you can you have the mountains, and you can see the Gran Sasso, which is the highest peak of the Apennines, and then you can see the Adriatic, all from the same sort of vantage point, and then there's just these rolling hills in between. And I mean, lots of Italy is beautiful, but that's definitely one of my favorite spots.
Ascoli is also really surprising because of the ancient churches and unexpected stone everywhere. I mean, I just realized it was kind of, I think that's some like the main, like the Duomo's from maybe the 12th century. I mean, it's a really old city.
I think it's a Roman city, no?
I think you're right. I was actually very struck by Ascoli when I went to visit also.
There's a church in the town of Affida, and we talked about the DOCG is named Affida, but like, I think the ground around it kind of fell away. Mm-hmm. So it kind of sits, and there's just like cliffs. I mean, you can walk around the building, but like the cliffs come like relatively close, and it's kind of an interesting anomaly.
Yeah, that is really interesting. So, do you in the book write about the origin of Pecorino as a grape variety and why it was, like when it fell away? Like, did it have a past in which it was a famous grape variety in Le Marche, or was it a grape variety that Cocci Grifoni, is that how you pronounce the winemaker's name, found in the annals somewhere in some literature that had been planted, and so he replanted? Or was it something that was grown and then disappeared? What was kind of the origin of Pecorino in the area?
Yeah, so I actually learned a great Italian idiom as part of this. So is it a question di lana caprina, or to goat's wool?
Oh, yeah.
Meaning sort of like, it doesn't really matter. Like, and this was in reference to whether it's origin is in Marche or Abruzzo,
Right,
because
really.
like
Wait,
probably
hold on. This is a new expression for me. What is the expression?
questione di lana caprina.
Di lana caprina. Okay,
Yes.
I like it.
Sorry,
I'm learning a new expression today.
my Philly accent, my Philly
No,
Italian
figurati.
accent.
It's not your Philly accent. I've just never heard this word. Did you know that expression, Caterina?
No, I just read about it. I had never heard about it. I
Lana
read the book
caprina.
yesterday, or the chapter yesterday, so I
So
thought it was
fun.
very funny.
That's very fun. Thank you.
Sure.
Grazie mille.
You know, yeah, you gotta love those idioms when you're trying to learn Italian, which I'm always trying to do.
Absolutely. I interrupted you though. You were on answering.
Well, no. So I was sort of saying that this was in reference to which region it actually belonged to, and
Right.
One person sort of made the comment of like it probably goes back before those regional lines were even drawn, because
Right.
it is there's a belief that it's an ancient grape that goes back quite a bit, and it's mentioned in a few places in like the 1800s as well. So it was around for a while, but I think it was not particularly productive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they've maybe done a few things to work on that in the nursery, but since it's been brought back, but it was very low production grape. It was hermaphroditic, I think, which means it took a few years to start to develop fruit. So there was, and obviously at some point you saw a lot of influx of international varieties like Chardonnay and Pinot Grigio, things like that.
Right.
And so it was, and I think you see that a lot with these stories, is that if it wasn't,
there's a lot of grapes, no, like when they wanted higher production, higher yields.
Yeah, and I mean
the grapes kind of went into oblivion because they were not productive enough.
You had mixed farming, you had co-ops paying based on volume, and not quality, and so there really wasn't a whole lot of reason to focus on a grape like this. It also is ready to harvest relatively early. Like even back when they first started doing it, they were harvesting in August, which nowadays is becoming more common, unfortunately. But back then certainly was not that common. So I think those are some of the reasons why it fell out of favor. And then to the second part, and we'll go into this in the text, but I think Coach Gaffroni had, when he had heard about it from another guy who was a sommelier in the area, this guy Teodoro Bugari, who had gone to a restaurant, who was a sommelier and instructor, and he had gone to a restaurant with a friend, with a student, and that student's family had been growing it, just in very small quantities. And they were growing it in this method where they graft it to trees, and it grows above the ground on the trees.
Oh, like vite maritate.
Yeah, exactly. So, so that was pretty interesting. But then Coach Gaffroni found it in. There was a, and it's funny because Marilena, who's Guido, Coach Gaffroni's daughter, called it a little garden, which always cracked me up. But they had found this guy who was growing it up in the mountains in Arquata del Tronto, which is sort of around the border of Marche and Abruzzo, and I think maybe Lazio as well. And so they had gone up there, and it was actually, and this was in the 1980s. It was actually on pre-phylloxera rootstock up in this little mountain garden, and that's where he got it from. And then I
was reading that you also talked to Tiberio, no? Cristina Tiberio.
Correct.
In Abruzzo, and she talks about a different clone that she was using. Do you see that there are different clones of the Pecorino in use today, or is it mostly the Rauchedo nursery?
Yeah. So to be honest, I didn't dig so deep into that. Just because I don't know. I mean, I feel like, I think it's interesting for us wine geeks, but I think that
Probably, yeah.
when you're trying to tell a story and you start getting into clones, it starts to become like a little bit too technical. But I think the story is really interesting because Tiberio, so Tiberio only uses mother, massal selection.
Mm.
And so they found some old Pecorino in their vineyard of Trebbiano Abruzzo that they had recently purchased, like around 2000 or so. And so they started using it and believe that it is an older clone. And I there was some similar information from this guy that I found named Vincenzo Aquilano, who had worked with Cataldi Madonna, and he had it was basically a similar story. Like he had found it in a small vineyard, or like a friend of his had found it in a small vineyard and brought it to him. That was in a different area in Abruzzo, and I'm blanking on the name of the town.
Okay.
But he had similar things as saying that there are some clones that are still very low production and have like very strong green and herbal notes. That's a little bit different than the one that more people are using that kind of ran through VCR. But yeah, so I think that my guess is that, most people who started with it probably got it from the nursery. And so it's this slightly more modern clone that was chosen for being a little easier to work with.
Do you see Pecorino as a grape that can really age? I've had some aged Pecorino, but I haven't had, let's say, a 25-year-old or 20-year-old Pecorino.
Right.
That's hard.
I mean, it's funny because you go to the places and the winemakers all tell you that it can age, and then you say, "Well, do you have any?" It's like, no.
Because of course they try to sell it all as soon as they can.
Right. I've had like maybe a 10-year-old, and it still worked really well. And those are ones that I got early on, and I said, okay, I'm going to lay some of these down because people are telling me this can age, but I can't actually find any. But longer than that, maybe like 8 to 10 years I've tried it, and it does work well. And I mean, it makes sense because it's got relatively high alcohol, relatively high acidity, or very high acidity. And so I think from that perspective,
absolutely,
it
really
works.
Nice structure. Well. I mean, it's a really interesting. I think
a lot of people call it like a white and a red.
Yeah, I never understand that expression, but I know what you mean. Yeah. But it's a very elegant wine.
They use that very much here. Though it's the red wine dressed in white. Yes.
Right. Yeah, they do. But I think it's an elegant wine. I've always thought that about Pecorino. Really elegant, elegant white. So where can people get your book?
You can go to my website, lifeattable.com. There's a bunch of ways to download it. It's an ebook only right now. It is, but it's on Amazon, it's on Barnes & Noble, it's on Apple Books, Google Books. So, and it's very inexpensive. It's just a couple dollars. And then, as Katerina mentioned, it is being translated into Italian. Thank you again, Katerina, for introducing us. And so it's the translation's done. I'm just formatting and proofreading as best that I can. And so that should be available relatively soon.
That's great.
So are you planning on any visits to present your book? Yeah.
I don't have anything set in stone at the moment, but I mean, I need to do more research if I want to write about other grapes.
Mm.
So what other grapes do you guys think fit?
Falanghina, 100% discovered by Mustili. Falanghina. That's totally
Interesting.
the same story.
I'm actually kind of surprised. That was not one I had on my list.
100%
I would
Falanghina.
say, I mean, I went to Tortona the other week, and I would say Timorasso. I think
Timorasso is a really good one too.
That's a good one.
I would say Timorasso, and then there's a whole bunch of Tuscan varieties that have been discovered that are, not that well distributed or available. There's a great red grape variety that I love called Punitello from Tuscany. That's a really great grape variety. There's Foglia Tonda, that like Manucci Droiandi
But you're focused on red or on white or both?
Doesn't matter.
Yeah. Are you writing only about whites?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I think as we've just covered in this 1 minute, there's I think what drew me to the concept was I think Pecorino is probably the first one where I really started to dig into this, but I also read about I mean, I haven't done a chapter on it, but I wrote an article about Trebbiano Spoletino, which I think
I was thinking about mentioning that today because
I love Trebbiano Spoletino.
It has a history all of its own. That's true, and it has nothing to do with Trebbiano at all.
Right, it's a great grape variety, and they're really pushing that now. Caterina and I were lucky enough to be in Montefalco together last June, and Trebbiano Spoletino was really the star of the show.
Yeah, they're doing good work.
Nini.
Cantinanini, yes. He's a personality. Yeah,
he is a personality. You would like him, I think. I don't know.
He makes great Trebbiano Spoletino.
He does. I love his Trebbiano. So that's a good one. I would definitely look into Falanghina.
But also Capretone. I mean, there's only a few producers on Vesuvio, but
I had that recently.
I think it's interesting as a grape.
It is interesting.
It's really nice,
yeah.
And there was some confusion about whether it was really Cote de Volpe or the same.
Well, but also, I mean, what about even Nerello? Before Etna was famous, were people drinking Nerello? Right? No. They weren't really. Right?
No.
Cataratta white, unbelievable whites from Etna. Right?
You also have the what's it called? What was I thinking? Kind of slipped my mind. The Casavecchia could also be interesting.
Yeah, I have mixed feelings about Casavecchia, to be honest. Yes.
Oh, it's a bit rough grape. That is true.
It is. It's kind of like Abruzzo, from the Veneto. Like you can have a really good one, or you could be like, this is kind of rustic. I could leave this where it is.
Yeah.
So it depends what you got.
True.
Anyway, there's a whole bunch to pick from.
Yeah, there's so many. So it's
Falanghina.
About picking the ones that speak to you and have a connection. I was going to say when we were talking about Sicily, I was talking about Grillo is another interesting one because it was never lost by any means, but it was basically only used for Marsala.
That's true.
So
that's true too. That's a good story.
And even like Sagrantino is it wasn't lost, but it was recently created a new style, which is a sort of a
they learned how to treat it in the vineyard better. So I mean,
I think there's a lot of ways you can go with these different chapters of this book, but I know you have a connection to Campania, which is also why I thought about that.
Well, and I think even Fiano and Greco were, basically revitalized by Master Berardino. So,
I mean, they're still very undervalued. I mean, people still ask for what grape, white grape from the south, and everybody says Sicily, Grillo, or something like that. But I think Fiano and Greco are two of the.
Yeah, I here in New York, Fiano and Greco are pretty well. People know Fiano and Greco, so they're not so
step outside of New York City, and that's not.
But maybe not. But here,
no, I don't think neither in Europe. If you go to Northern Europe, not many.
This is why I order wine from New York City.
Yeah, it's I live in a bubble. We get everything, but you can't get You can't get that much Pugnitello, for example.
Yeah, some of those
But that's
were.
hard here to get
I
Pugnitello.
know. Or Cesanese. Cesanese from
I mean, a
that.
good Pugnitello. No, yeah, Cesanese is also interesting.
Cesanese is a fun grape.
It's become also quite revival in the last 10 years. So.
Yeah.
There was a speaking of getting Cesanese, this is sort of a silly story, but it's kind of funny. You guys will appreciate it. So on wine.com, which is a good online store for wine here, and they have everyday wine to exceptional wine, and they have warehouses in different spots. So depending on where you live, you have a certain warehouse. But they had this Cesanese from I don't know, it's like 2016, and this is like within the last couple of years. And I looked at it; it was the only one they had in stock. And I'm thinking, like, how long has this been sitting around? And like, is it worth taking? But it was just there for like years.
Did you buy it?
I don't think I ever did. I'm not sure. I think I was just kind of skeptical of it because it was just sitting there. And I didn't trust it, but I thought that was kind of amusing.
That is amusing. I mean, there's so many sparkling wines that are kind of have been rediscovered lately, but they're not from esoteric grape varieties. But
right. I mean, there's one, Herbamat is a.
Oh yeah, Herbamat, right.
There's a variety that I think is currently used maybe for blending, but I think.
Yeah.
I've heard it, with climate change and stuff, it could potentially become more important.
That's true. I think I might have tried one still wine Herbamat, monovarietal, but not too much of that. But it's a great project, really fun.
Finding those like different. Like I recently bought white Aglianico del Voture, I think. I think it was a white Aglianico from somewhere. I forget exactly where it was from, but I'll be interested. I haven't tried it yet. We'll see how it is.
Yeah. I don't know.
I always like to buy weird ones when I come across them.
That is fun. Well, I wish you success with this fun book. Do you want to name the other two books that you wrote as well? Are they also on your website?
Everything is on my website. I've written something. So since we're talking about wine, I've written another ebook on Chianti Classico, which is really about the history of how the two DOCGs came to be and like how Chianti started out as a small thing and then overexpanded and sort of split off into Chianti and Chianti Classico and goes into the history of that. I write a lot about history if you haven't figured it out.
But that was also an ebook. I thought that was an article, but
yeah, it started as an article and then I expanded it a bit into an ebook.
Okay, cool.
I wrote something about the history of the Friulano, Tokai Friulano grape, which is free, because that was also an article that I expanded in an ebook, and then my first full-length book was called Lost Mount Penn. That was the one that we did on your podcast, Susannah, and that was about like wine in Pennsylvania in the 1800s, which is a very esoteric topic. Speaking of esoteric topics, doesn't seems like it wouldn't be something that is real, but actually a really fascinating story. And then my most recent book was about the history of Philadelphia sandwiches. So nothing about wine, but cheesesteaks and hoagies and roast pork and all that kind of stuff. And that's been doing pretty well in the Philadelphia area. So we've been having some fun with that.
Yeah, that's very fun. So you have a bunch of books and more coming out, more ebooks coming. I see.
Well, that's great. It was great to have you here and to learn more about the book. And for those of you who want to buy it, I dropped it in the link. So you can find it where we're live on LinkedIn.
I appreciate you guys having me on to talk about this. And we'll be in touch as more things come up.
Yeah, you just have my mind is now thinking about all esoteric Italian varieties. I'm very happy.
Well,
So thank you.
Susannah, if you want to write a chapter, we'll throw it in there. Go for it.
Oh, okay.
Please do.
I'll
Think about it.
definitely think about that. It is a topic that's really dear to
Well,
my
I
heart.
like actually the model. I must say, when I started reading your book, I liked the model because there is a grape I plan to write about, and I will. It's just that I feel like a bit like a mountain to climb because I don't really have time, and I always feel that it has to be something long, and then I was like, no, it doesn't really have to be long. I mean, I can actually start with a chapter.
Wow.
And I
So
think
do you
in this,
writing
in a,
style? Sorry.
Right?
Please continue, Mike. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
I was just going to say, in this particular case where like each thing was a grape, it made sense that like you could read one and not have to read the next one. But I mean, it is, logistically, it's a little bit of a challenge because I think people are sort of expecting, they understand a book, but sort of something in between an article and a book is a little more challenging to sell somebody on. But
My question was, do you have sort of a writing method that has helped you to write books? Because as Katarina was saying, it can be daunting to think about writing a whole book. So then you get blocked up. So do you have any tips of how to, what's worked for you?
yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've heard people say like, I have to block everything out and block off hours of a time to write. And I just, I can't, I mean, yeah, like maybe that would be useful, but I just can't do that. I can't possibly do that. So, short spurts is, I think, useful. I've been playing around with doing when I'm having a little trouble with my head. I've been playing around with using audio to text, like voice to text.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, it never comes out as eloquent, but it gets you started.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just like say a bunch of stuff, and then I'll go back and edit it, on the screen, and that can be, and it works. It's gotten to the point where it still doesn't get every word right, but it works relatively well, and that can be a good way to get a lot of things out of your head more quickly, and then kind of go back and edit them down a little bit. So
great tips. Thank you. Sorry, Katarina, I had interjected. You were saying something.
No, I mean, I was done. No worries. Okay, so anything else you want to add before we leave you to your day?
I did just find out that this Pecorino book got longlisted on the 67 Pall Mall.
Oh, congratulations! Great.
So yeah, that felt kind of nice.
That's terrific. Congratulations. That's wonderful.
So it's not just me saying it's good. It's at least one other person thought it was good.
Well, you only need one. Right?
No, but it is good. I mean, it's focusing a lot on the story, so it's not a lot of technical stuff, which I think is good. So it's definitely a book for everyone who just wants to get a good story about Italian wine. And it's easy to read. It's quick, so it's not too heavy, which I think is the problem today. Now that a lot of wine professionals want to be semi-academic and say a lot of scientific stuff, which
right?
is not scientific.
Like you brought up the clones. Like I read about that. I talked to people about it, but I decided like.
No, I agree. That's because I'm like a nerd, so I kind of
exactly.
But I think so I think it's a great example of how good storytelling about grapes or wine can be. I mean, it can be for everyone. It doesn't have to be for a small clique of people.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
So thank you, Mike. And for those of you who will watch later on, you can find the link, as said. And otherwise, you just head on over to Life at Table now. Is your blog. Susannah, do you want to?
No, just nice to see both of you.
And then also head on over and follow us on Substack, All That Wine. We are not that frequent in our writing, but we're there.
But we will be more frequent. That's why I asked these kind of questions.
When things get a bit easier.
What are your techniques? What are your tactics? Because people have the amount of time they have, but it depends how you use your time, right? It's about.
But there are things to read, so for anyone who wants to head on over. Feel free to do so. And we don't know when next live will be, but soon somehow with some interesting guests like Mike. So thank you, everyone, and
So
see you
much more
soon.
interesting than me.
See you soon.
Yeah.
I'm going to have
See
Pecorino.
you. So thank you, Mike. Thank you, Susannah, and
Thank you.
have a great day. Ciao,
Have a
ciao.
wonderful day.
Thanks.
Ciao, ciao.